Check this mic, speakers. Okay, cool. So what's up, guys? So today wanted to talk about virtual closing, virtual selling, not just utilizing the phone. So as many of you know, Zach and myself, we primarily utilize a two call process, two call closed, sometimes turns into multiple calls depending on the follow-up. But what we do is we lead from a phone call into a Zoom. And Zoom is super important. It's super effective. And also, it's going to be important and dependent on what it is that you're selling, right? If you're selling something higher end, we sell solar. Solar systems can range all the way up to $100,000, over $100,000, right? And it's a very important concept that we need to make sure the homeowner grasps. That's why we believe that, presenting over Zoom, like sharing our screen, we get into presentation mode a little bit. And when you present a certain way, depending on what your product is, it's usually going to be able to sell itself, right? So that's what you need to leverage and utilize. Also, we'll go a little bit more in depth into different psychology of sales and stuff, but psychologically, homeowners who are purchasing something at a bigger price, typically they're going to think more about it naturally. Think of yourself as a consumer. You are going to be wanting to really make sure that that product works as it's prescribed, right? Um, so ultimately, it's important to figure out what works best for you. For me personally, I have kind of established a system that I'm able to present over Zoom. I get through this process and I know at each point, at each stage in the presentation, I know where I need to pivot to. I know what questions I need to ask. I know how to tie down each of those sections, right? So when I'm presenting, I have an intro and then I have kind of creating the problem, reiterating whatever problem my product solves, and then from there, I present my product. I talk about how that's going to solve their problem, why they really need that. And then I go into price and I try to tie it all together. But ultimately, what you need to focus on is making sure that you tie down each of those sections, right? It's easier to like box in those objections, so to speak. And you make sure, okay, if you're talking about who you are and your company first, at the very end, does that all make sense? Do you have any questions on that? I know everyone kind of has a different framework of the questions and the things that they want to ask to make sure that a homeowner gets it, but you want to tie down each section. So you talk about your company first, you talk about yourself first, why they should listen to you, why they should look at you as a subject matter expert, so to speak. Talk about the problem, you recreate that problem and you expand it. You talk about it very big and make it like a really big issue. This is a really good question gathering phase as well. You want to make sure you're asking proper questions. Hey, if this were to do this, what would you do? What type of position would you be in? A good example of this for us is with solar. If you're selling solar, you know, people are coming to us, they're looking to save money on their utility bill, right? When people come to us and ask, how am I going to save money, right? Or we assume that they're going to save money, they're wanting to save money. It's probably fair to assume that if their bill went up another $50 a month, $100 a month, that's going to put them in a worse situation, right? So put that out there, right? Put that out into the conversation and know, hey, Mr. Homeowner, let me ask you this. I know you want to save $5 or $10 a month right now. We could still potentially do that for you. And I can show you different ways of how to do that. But more importantly, if you're looking to save $5 a month, that kind of tells me you're already up against your budget, right? So if your bill increased, your utility bill increased another 50, $100 next year, what type of position are you going to be in? That's going to go over your budget. Is that going to be okay for you? What are you going to do? And then you really pause. And the thing is, too, is like Zach always talks about, and I know he talked about this in phone sales, and he talks about the difference of in person and phone and how you're losing a lot of your interaction ability. Zoom allows you to do that. So you can kind of lean in, right? Like I have my microphone right here, and you can kind of lean in and say, so like, you know, Mr. Homeowner, how is that going to affect you? What are you going to do? And in that manner, you're able to leverage your tonality as well as kind of like your body language, because you're not jumping at the screen. You want to make sure. And the other thing about Zoom that I really like is inadvertently, it makes me focus a lot more, right? In phone sales, I will sometimes get distracted, right? Someone will text me. We have a pretty good sized team. Someone will have something going on. Someone will text me. They'll have an issue, they'll have a concern or whatever while I'm on the phone, and I'll see it pop up and it'll distract me, right? I'll look in that conversation. Whereas with Zoom, I know I'm going into an appointment. I put my phone on do not disturb, and I'm laser focused on the screen, laser focused on the camera. I need to be presentable the entire time. So that's a huge asset that I don't think a lot of people really think about when it comes to another upside, another benefit. Um, but it really all boils down to, you can be successful in any of these different ways of selling. I've had a lot of experience in person selling, when I was both in the Navy as a recruiter and also in person solar. I used to go to their house. I used to basically sit at their kitchen table. You're able to strike up different levels of conversation. Now, let's talk about a couple of things that inhibit a Zoom call or Google Meets or whatever it is, a video call that you're looking to utilize. One is just complexity. So you need to know the type of person that you're talking to. And if you do a two call close, you're never going to want to do a Zoom straight from an ad or straight from a lead. I wouldn't, like, you never want to have that initial call on a Zoom. You'd always want to set those expectations. And I use it as part of my process. So my initial call is I say, hey, I want to get some information from you. And then from there, talk a little bit about our process, um, and see if it's something that would be a good fit. I take them down the lines of our process and I say, hey, what I like to do is set up a video call. Reason being is because I'm going to go through a lot of information. And what I found is that I'm able to share my screen, show you what your solar system is going to look like. We can kind of map out this problem together, map out where the panels want to go, also go through a bunch of different ways to pay for it. That way you have a full scope, full understanding of what it is that you're looking at, which I know is ultimately, what you're looking to accomplish. Typically only takes 15 to 20 minutes, and then really just depends on how many questions you have. So you set that up as part of your process and non-negotiable. And then some people will balk at it. Some people will say, hey, I don't necessarily want to do a video call. Um, in those scenarios, you can leverage a couple of different things. So I completely understand that. Honestly, the reason that we want to do a video call is just for integrity purposes. We want to make sure that all of our customers have a good understanding of how solar works. And again, I'm using solar as an example. Really depends on the complexity of your product and what you are selling. Solar is a very complex product, so you want to make sure, like we want to make sure that they can see all this. They have a good foundational understanding of this, because the other thing with solar is the sales process itself is pretty long, right? Once they sign a contract, they don't get installed for about 45 to 60 days in some markets, which just leaves a lot of room for them to cancel, back out, buyer's remorse, whatever it is, right? So if you do it the right way, my cancel rate has historically been very low, especially when it comes to Zoom presentations, because I want to build a relationship. They see my face. They know, hey, okay, I'm not just buying a $70,000 product over the phone with someone I never met, someone I never talked to. You got to remember, always put yourself in the shoes of the consumer, right? It all boils down to the product. Like if it's a cheap product and it's not something that they have to pay monthly for, it might work. Or if it's cheap monthly payment, or if it's something that they really need or something that they already have in replacement of something else, right? Totally fine. But most people, like, there's already a stigma about solar that it's a scam, right? So most people are going to click on this stuff. They're going to see that something's free, da 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 da. So you want to make sure that you're cultivating that relationship so that over the course of that 45 to 60 days, you have a relationship with that homeowner and can, prevent them from any cancellation or anything like that. So I've just seen it a lot. I've seen a lot of people be able to close over the phone at a very high level, but what happens is it was, people would do a one call close, and I'm not saying you can't do that, but you need to be prepared for a fall off rate as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share my screen. All right. So I want to share a demo. So we call these demos demonstrations of how their systems are going to work. Um, Kind of the importance of this is if you are selling certain things over the phone, sometimes you are going to be emailing like a proposal or something of that sort and walking through it with them. And you need to keep in mind that people will tend to open up that email and scroll down all the way to the bottom, and look at the price, right? And depending on the price, the cost, if they have any relativity of what that thing might cost, they might shut down completely because they have no context of what that looks like. So when you're on Zoom, that's the beauty of it, is you control when they get that information, with the correct preemptive information, right? So you dictate when they can actually see those numbers because, I mean, solar, another great example. And again, I'm talking about what I am currently doing, but solar, if it's $50,000, they scroll down, and mind you, we're talking to some people sometimes who are looking to save $5 a month, which isn't going to move the needle a whole lot, right? If they're looking to save $5 a month and that's a big deal to them, and they scroll down and they see $50,000 with no other context about how it's replacing their utility bill, how there's no other additional charges, and they're able to lock in their costs, right? And not giving me the opportunity to paint that picture. I could paint the best picture possible, but they might be completely out of whack and shut down and not even want to listen to me in terms of it, right? Um, so what I'll do here is share my screen. I will make another video as well. I'll have to do it from my phone, I think, kind of showing how to utilize Zoom, share your screen, pause your share. So if you need to adjust something on that as well while you're going through it, you definitely want to be a little bit more savvy when it comes to this. Um, all right. So disregard the address. You can steal the address if you want, but basically, so I'll start out talking about our company, right? Who we are as an installer, what our history is, my experience in the industry, my experience of all this, just creating a nice little story so as to why they want to listen to you. People typically are going to buy because of three things. One, they like the product. Two, they like you as a person. And three, they like the company, like and trust. So all three things. They trust the product's going to do what we say it's going to do. They trust us as a person, um, and they trust the company to deliver all of those things combined. So going here, you can also order this however you want to. This is just kind of a general idea, but see, as you know, I control everything. But kind of what I was talking about is each one of these slides, I know exactly what I need to talk about, what I need to touch on. Traditional power production, this is ahead of everything, and this is set up for a reason, right? There's people that are way smarter than me that actually put this in order, and it's meant to remind us, hey, we need to talk about the problem first. We need to talk about why electricity is a major, major, major issue. So whatever the problem is, whatever it is that you're selling, if you're selling pest control, right? You got to really recreate the problem first and then provide the solution. If you provide the solution without the context of the problem, you want to make sure you're delivering these things in a certain order, right? So I really highlight majority of my presentation, honestly, will be in this position. It'll go back and forth. It'll ask a lot of questions. It will be talking about kind of rhetorical and probing questions that homeowners need to answer in terms of getting getting me the info that I need to be able to know what I need to hone in on. And asking good questions, right, will tell you how to steer the rest of your presentation. A presentation should never be one size fits all. It should have a flow to it, but there's going to be certain things that you need to highlight. There's some people that are going to be a lot more analytical, right? There's some people that are going to just be straight wanting to see the cheapest cost overall because they're feeling a pain, right? You need to know how to deliver to each and every one of those people and how to highlight certain things and figure out what's important to them, right? You don't want to be talking about like people who just care about price and care that this is going to solve their problem don't necessarily care about the product itself, like the technology behind it, whatever it is. You don't want to go into the weeds because what you're going to do is create more questions. There's no need to necessarily highlight the info about microinverters or highlight the types of panels or highlight the warranties. They're more concerned about what it's going to cost them, right? How it's going to save them money, what they're currently doing. They're already bought in. Um, and then on the flip side, I've had this happen too, where I've had customers straight up tell me in this process, the biggest thing that was frustrating to them is they've spoken to other people and other people didn't give them the info on the panels or the microinverters or the warranty. So what did I do? I went to the next stage of the presentation and I talked very like detailed, like went down rabbit holes talking about the information, making sure that he had a good understanding because I knew, okay, that's important to him. That is what's going to separate me from the previous people that he spoke with. Then down here, you start talking about the solution, right? How solar works, what solar does. Utility companies are already building solar farms, right? That's what all these utility costs are going up for. Then you talk about their system, how it's going to work for them, what it's going to look like for them on their house. This is really cool too, because now also on Zoom, right? I'll have people on Zoom who are on their phone. And guess what? They're on their phone, they're trying to look at their house and they're like, oh, wow, that's my house. That's super cool. How'd you get a picture of that? How are there solar panels on my house? What? That is so cool, right? It creates a level of interest. The other thing too is kind of what I was talking about. I get distracted on the phone, like just being on the phone with people for too long. If you're doing phone sales, you need to understand if you are talking too much, right? If you are giving too much information, because the person on the other line, I guarantee you we're all a little guilty of this, might be on their phone scrolling Instagram and they're just agreeing with you. They don't really have a feeling of engagement in the conversation. You need to keep your conversation going, right? You can't just overtake it and start talking about your pitch that's 3 minutes long and they haven't said anything. Whereas with Zoom, you have a little bit more leeway and flexibility to do that because you're able to see if they're looking at you. You're able to see what they're doing. Now, not everyone will always be on their phone, but or be on camera. Sometimes they can't get the camera to work, but you can ask them questions specifically. Hey, can you see the types of inverters or the types of panels that are on here? Okay, great. You make sure they're looking, right? A lot of what sales really is just asking the questions we feel very uncomfortable asking. So sometimes it's like kind of checking people at the door on Zoom, seeing where they're at, and you know, gut checking them a little bit. So then, as you can see, then we kind of go into the cost. There's some stuff. There's other info here, but like this is the other thing about knowing your product like very well. I know that, okay, right here, the pricing is next. So this is where I want to talk about the tax credit, for example, right? If there's any info, you need to have these cues and these prompts that give you that so you don't skip any steps in your process. You should make your sales process ultimately as duplicatable as possible, like as the flow as duplicatable as possible, while also being knowledgeable enough to be able to go down those rabbit holes when they open up. Um, I mean, naturally, solar is not a $20 product. right? Obviously, this is a 25-year monthly payment. So the longer the relationship people are feeling that they need to get into, the longer time that it's reasonable for them to feel like they need to consider doing it, until like they absolutely grasp the concept. So we'll talk more about that in different products and levels of sales, but for this point, it's really important to use Zoom. So one thing I like to do as well is I like to highlight certain things. Because when I highlight, I'm coaching them to look at certain stuff, right? So your monthly payment is going to be 229 for the first 18 months. After 18 months, if you use the tax credit, stay at 229. Your tax credits, $19,950, leaving your net system costs. In this scenario, it's pretty bad because it's like it's the same highlighting color, but you get the point. It's ultimately super beneficial to steer them of what you want them to look at and where you want them to look. So, um, other than that, one of the biggest success things that I've had closing on the first Zoom call would be when I would have a process where I would show them a couple different ways to pay for it, right? And I would do it quickly, so they wouldn't necessarily have a lot of time to change, but I would do it right in front of them. I'd change, hey, these are different financing options, at a 25-year. We explained dealer fees not really relevant for this training, but when I explain that, I go through it, and now they see two different finance options. I've shifted the way that they are thinking. They are now no longer thinking about solar versus not solar. They are thinking about, how am I going to pay for it? What's the better option for me? Right. And then at that point, what I would utilize is I'd leave my screen up and I would just pause. I would just shut my mouth and I would pause at that point. Um, and what's beautiful about that is I could pick up my phone, I'd be on camera, I would kind of just sit there quietly, and I would just use the approach of first person to talk would would lose, right? They would be the ones that ended up going solar. So if I just didn't say anything, I already kind of knew after doing this a couple of times that they would typically go like one of three ways. And at that point, all I needed to do was master those objections and those things that they would say and have a response. And then we would move on to the next steps. But it'd be very uncomfortable. I'd be sitting there for, sometimes a minute, 2 minutes, and it feels really, really long because no one really knows like what's happening. Right. They think I'm going to continue going on, but I've given all the information they need. And then I just pause. And that's my way of asking for a close, asking for them to steer me in the next direction of what do we do from here. So that is my process when we're talking about Zoom sales. Again, for some context, probably should have said this in the beginning so you listen to the whole video, but if you made it this far, I've had a lot of success. I've closed over 150 solar deals doing this pretty much over Zoom in the last year and a half. Have taught a lot of members of our team the same different processes. And it definitely works. It's the closest that you'll get to in person as well. So look forward to it, guys. Feel free to check this video out and we'll continue to drop even more.